Thank you so much. So now we're going to return for our final round of paper speakers, and our third speaker for the proposition is Aliya Adebowale. Aliya is a second-year undergraduate student studying HSPS at Trinity College, and she is also a member of full committee here at the Union. Aliya, you have the ears of the House.
When I was asked to speak on this topic just over 24 hours ago, I was filled with dread for two reasons. Firstly, because the Cambridge Essay Crunch is inherently opposite to my love for the Union, and secondly, because my love for political theory makes me see the virtue of democratic societies today and the idea that we can overcome our differences because inherently, like Aristotle would argue, we are all political animals and therefore we are all capable of working together to come and find solutions that work in the best interest of everyone. However, it still seems that within this trope, there are many divisions that arise in our revered city-state, which today is Britain, which include issues such as identity crises, political extremism, the failures of the political establishment, and lastly, social media. Some quick-fire numbers to reflect how deep this division is include. An August 2024 Ipsos poll found that 85% of people argued that Britain was fairly or very divided today. A further 66% of people thought that political extremism was a key form of this division. And another 73% of people argued that the state of democracy had become too divisive in Britain today. The numbers don't lie, and they demonstrate that the only thing British people can agree on today is the fact that we are in fact divided. However, we might look at certain issues, again, starting with identity, to explain why this happens and why, unfortunately, it's quite difficult for us to overcome them. As this is an equalities debate, and I am a person of color, I am acutely aware of the perceived but not legitimate view that non-traditional or non-indigenous British communities are disrupting the fabric of what it means to be British today. By non-traditional British identities, I refer to the gov.uk site and its description in demographic census as what non-white communities are. Perhaps the most infamous example of when this took a toll on British people was in Enoch Powell's 1968 Rivers of Blood speech, which was greatly brought up by the opposition today. This speech played on concerns of immigration and welfare instability, touching on the ideas that there aren't enough hospital beds for indigenous populations' wives to be born in, or there aren't enough school positions, or that there aren't enough jobs. It doesn't seem very different from what we hear today. Granted, even by 60 standards, that was far too extremist, with Enoch Powell being dismissed by then PM Ted Heath shortly after. However, many of these things are not distant from our reality today. The opposition brought up a really good point about football and how we used to be a great source of division previously, and hearing from male relatives in my family, I can completely agree with it being a site of racism. However, I argue that this is still a really big problem today. We all saw what happened in 2021 at the finals. We all saw on Twitter when Marcus Rashford was referred to as a monkey, when the hard ER was used in Britain, a supposedly tolerant country. We also, as well, in 2024, how Black people didn't come out like they did previously in 2021 to watch the finals because they were scared that there would be a repetition of the former violence. And they weren't wrong. I've heard stories of multiple people being beaten up, attacked, or racially abused in the aftermath of that. Further, the question is, what does this tell us about British division? It obviously points to the failure of the government on two parts: to reassure people of color and show them that they are looking actively out for them. But also, it also demonstrates that the government isn't doing enough to prevent the currently marginalized, quote unquote, white populations who claim that they are being sidelined by their government. They aren't doing enough to shift these concerns away from racial scapegoating and instead focus on solid economic solutions to the issues that we have today. Today's Britain is skewed because when one person or the other, from any side of the political spectrum or in any opinion, has committed a grave transgression, everyone on that group is held responsible, and that cannot be read as a sufficient sign of moral and political consensus in a country. Such blame for the division in Britain should also be placed at the feet of Parliament and also at number 10. I do not wish to be patronizing, but I think we can all agree that the leaders in Parliament have a responsibility to lead by example. They have a responsibility to set high standards for how the population should behave. However, British politicians, not all of them, but quite a few, have become emblematic of the deep disrespect that is being afforded to the people and towards political culture. Take, for example, during the Brexit debate, when Jacob Rees-Mogg lounged against one of the Parliament sofas, or when, following the death of Joe Cox, Boris Johnson, after his short eulogy, changed it into a political point speech, arguing that the best way to honor her would be to get Brexit done. These instances of insensitivity running across the political leadership sets a terrible example for us. Of course, we're all political ourselves, and we do have the power and the duty to make differences ourselves, but it is quite disheartening and inherently divisive to see such polarizing and devastating moments in politics. I, of course, must pay homage to the figures sat opposite me as two independent figures in politics, demonstrating what British politics could become if it's revived these fundamental political values of tolerance and independence. There is also, as rightfully brought up in a floor speech, an emerging phenomenon known as the echo chamber, which is when individuals only encounter information online that conforms to their own views. And this occurs because when we follow people and when we interact with certain forms of content, the algorithm keeps on reproducing these views for us so that it becomes the only narrative that we see. Whilst there is limited evidence as to how this impacted the 2024 American elections, I think we can draw some examples from there, as many Democrats weren't quite expecting a Trump win because they were on a side of Twitter that suggested that all Trump supporters were inherently bad and nobody would be coming out to vote for him. I think England can learn a lot of examples from that because it demonstrates what happens when communication fails and when we stop talking to each other or stop listening as well. Britain, to some extent, has also experienced this issue through Cambridge Analytica, a think tank with no relation whatsoever to the university, which was embroiled in a scandal of fake AI messages and also fake information being spread, particularly in relation to Brexit, but also the 2016 American election. It demonstrates how we are becoming desensitized to what the truth even means, or if the truth can even exist today. And there are multiple doomsday scholars who will bring this topic up to you and show that for the reason of social media and sound bites and echo chambers, that all the past issues that have been discussed on both the proposition and opposition as inherently existing problems in British society are taking on a new mutant and devastating form which can't easily be contained because we cannot ourselves control social media. As we aren't the big companies, and we also lack the power ourselves to truly overcome this new realm of divisiveness. Perhaps spending so much time in the Union has made me think that political experience is monolithic, that despite our diverse range of identities and views, we can still find some common ground amongst ourselves and manage to listen to one another. It is unfortunate that this is not the case in the places where it really matters, like Parliament, in the news, even when we speak to ourselves. And whilst it is easy to compare ourselves to standards of the past and say that the unsavory characters and values of the past no longer exist, I would argue that we're experiencing one of the worst revivals of 20th century-esque British culture, in which deep intolerance and mass fear-mongering was a key problem. One which, compounded with our new digital polls, divides us more than ever. And I would argue that divisive politics, therefore, is not a memory in British society, but rather is living history, which for generations to come we will experience. Thank you.